computers and microphones and all that stuff, there are some wonderful things. And if it wasn't for the internet, a lot of consciousness would still be at a very low level. So it's only really from like 1996 that there's been this huge boost through some of the things that we enjoy. But this polarity works both ways. So the good things get good and the bad things get even worse. And there seems to be a point where it's at such crazy levels. It's so diverse and so weird. And weird in the ancient sense of the word, as like unreal, as magical almost, that you think, well, this can't go on. I've no idea how on earth this is going to be restructured, because that would seem to be 1,000 years work that I don't think anybody's quite got the stomach or brains for, quite frankly. And so what on earth are we going to do? And I think that the sort of higher level, the galactic level, really is saying, don't worry about that, because there are two elements to this. There are some unreal meltdowns, as I call them, with the economy is a very peculiar entity when you look at it, and the Federal Reserve and what that is, and this fractional reserve banking system. It's very, very odd indeed. And to suggest that the powers that be, or the powers that were, as they're now becoming, didn't understand that when they designed it, I think would be very naive. I think it's very well understood that the economic systems have a finite life and then have to be rebooted, just like in the same way that a German economy would be trashed after various reparations and so on after a world war, brought to a certain point and then rise again as the most powerful economic system in Europe. I think that's planned decades in advance. I have no doubt about it through my studies at all. And of course, that's rather an esoteric view these days in the mainstream. But I don't think it will be. I think when you trace it, I think that becomes rather obvious. But aside from these unreal meltdowns, there's also this, as I say, unplanned brokenness, in that people just don't want to do it anymore. People don't want to give 90% of the time away to something that's rubbish, essentially. They don't want to do that. And I think it's been a tremendous surprise to the system that people have come out in such numbers and said, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not interested in money in the way that I thought I should have been. And I have observed the system, the control system, as I call it sometimes, deploy these very bizarre countermeasures to compensate for their failings. And I am happy now, to use that word, that the control system is beginning to rupture. It's beginning to fail. And I think that if you take a sort of magnifying glass and go over the news and look at all the different things that occur with WikiLeaks and hackers and all these fiscal problems and all the uprisings and upheavals and revolutions, you could say that there's some conspiracy there. You could say that there's some naughtiness there, definitely. But there's also some natural elements to some of that, which I think has been a tremendous surprise. And I think it is stretching the capacity of the control system to actually do something about it. So I do think that they, in parenthesis, are struggling at the moment, because so many people are sort of beginning to detonate their old beliefs and their old traditions. And I even see this in my own friends and family, people who I thought were absolutely dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, Republicans, Labourites, Conservatives, whatever, who had these very strong views that they've carried around for half a century, some of them. They're beginning to think, you know what, that's all nonsense, isn't it? That is all nonsense. And it doesn't quite work like that. And their views on society and on multiculturalism as a myth, basically, not in any sense of racial prejudice whatsoever, but the idea that it's something that everybody, all communities and societies need. Some extremely biased and imprudent planning in Britain, certainly in some of the areas in London on that front, has created tremendous problems for people of all ethnic backgrounds. And you can trace that back to some very strange policies in the 50s and 60s that don't benefit anybody. Black, white, red, green, yellow, doesn't matter what colour. And it seems to be that built-in obsolescence was there from the very beginning. Just like if you buy an iPod, the machine is designed to be a useless doorstop in a few years, because otherwise, if they built a pristine, brilliant, functioning, replaceable, self-maintaining device, obviously it'd be difficult to sell new ones. So the system has built-in obsolescence. The difference is that it's only a very small faction within that control system who have the higher perspective to say, well, actually, we're not just talking about the 3D here. There are moves that nobody is in control of. There are phase shifts at a very high energetic level that nobody is in control of, that it appears that the sun and the earth and the moon in particular, those three astral bodies, go through these cycles. And the only people who understood that are not around anymore. So there's obviously some wisdom regarding this from the ancient world, i.e. the undocumented world that is just shrouded in mists now. But as you know full well, some of that information was protected and guarded, and some of it is still in good hands, and some of it got into the wrong hands. But there is a body of wisdom out there, a body of sacred texts and science and art and mysticism and sorcery of a good nature that says, listen, folks, this stuff goes on all the time. And these seasonal energetic shifts represent massive changes and very, very radical bifurcation points where the species can literally split off in two. And how apparent that will be is yet to be seen, whether it's a physical split or it's a more subtle split. Some of the people I speak to, are very much one or the other, and I think it'll probably be a little of both. But I think there is a split on the way, and I don't have any problem with notions of mass die-offs and stuff, and I think that's a completely natural state of affairs. In the same way that a forest, part of the ecology of the forest, it has a massive burn down every so often, otherwise the whole forest would die. So the forest itself has to burn down over extended periods of time. Certainly within one's lifetime, that might sound a bit odd, but an ecologist friend of mine who works in the Amazon I was talking about this, and there's some very interesting parallels with consciousness and energy and the ecology of forest life as a whole. And fire is part of the successful survival of a large forest environment. And in the same way, I think that we could say very much the same thing about the Earth as a whole. And I think naturally on this show, at a more esoteric level, we find the answers. And some of that is most certainly connected to the sun. And I think that if anybody wants to go to the root of a lot of these issues, because we're just talking about symptoms here, we're just talking about the outer sort of tendrils of this thing. But if you want to go to the heart of it, the juice of it, we need to look at the sun, because I think that's where a lot of the answers lie. And certainly it starts to explain this preponderance over pouring all this energy and time and effort into so-called sun worship, which again is a bit of a odd sort of nomenclature nowadays. But when you go to what that actually means, as a study of the sun, and as a relationship with that entity, and say, you know what, I don't think it is just a big fireball thing in the sky that heats things up. I think there's something more interesting going on. And that is where a lot of my work has led. Not in some vast, amazing conclusion, just naturally gravitated to there. So when I see fractures in the societal system, and I see concerned citizens, most of them really good, by the way, I always find that personally for me, a lot of the assurance and a lot of the wisdom comes from this solar body that we're also familiar with in one sense, and yet have no idea of what it actually is and what its relationship is with the Earth. And I think that is where a lot of the answers lie as to what is going to occur and why it occurs and how frequently this goes on. And you have to lift yourself up from being Greg and being Neil, because if we do it from that perspective, it's not really an operational fair thing to do. But if you lift yourself out of that to this higher self, to this fourth dimensional consciousness, if you like, then you can see it and think, well, this is an absolutely organic, normal movement of energy in the system. It's another form of vibration. It's another waveform. It's another manifestation. The fact that things come and go, sometimes on a big scale, is all right. It's completely normal. But you can only do that, of course, from a certain perspective. And the normal signal that's broadcast through the newspapers and television and internet doesn't allow that to happen. Because if it did, people would stop worrying, and that creates a problem when you're trying to build and maintain a political architecture.
Just as a speculation, how much do you think this perspective that you have is in alignment with what you might call global elite, or those who are at the higher levels of the control system? If you put yourself in the position of the global elite, do you think you'd be operating from that same perspective, imposing chaos or pulling the rug out from under the economic system, or implementing repressive control system in various ways, all of that sort of thing?
If I was in shadow all the time and my consciousness was at that low vibratory rate, I think what we're looking at here is, in my dimensional model, you can't really proceed out of a fourth dimensional space when you're operating at a very service to self, low vibration, negative aspect. You can't go anywhere. And so I see that there are some fourth dimensional entities, intelligences, and you can make of that what you will, that are basically in a very sticky position where a certain consciousness that serves as a source of energy needs to be maintained in a certain low vibratory state. And so if that's the case, then we're not just talking about human beings trying to do the best they can and a few people being a bit, naughty in order to hoard their resources and wealth to one side. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something a little bit more boundary softening, a little bit more esoteric, which again, I think a lot of people don't have a massive problem with this. It's a way of thinking about it, which is that there are these entities that need low vibration consciousness to manifest and to maintain their position. Again, if you take a look at some of the old texts, certainly the Gnostic materials, they will map this out in quite a nice, complete cosmology and say, yes, there are these entities that came down, kind of made a flawed creation, and now they're as stuck here as anyone else. And one of the things that maintains them, because of the error in their manifestation, is this very low vibration consciousness. And if you want to map it to the Hindu formulation of energy pools in the body, you could say that those lower 3 points of the root, the sacral and the solar plexus, is where most people are at most of the time. So the whole of one's life is centered around preservation and gratification and sensuality. And that's like, a very narrow part of the human experience, and yet it constitutes, however intelligent or thick somebody may be, most people's lives. And so there's a distinct cutoff of moving consciousness through those higher portals of expression, through more independent, empowering, sovereign centers of expressing consciousness, and the normal unreality signal is specifically designed to keep people in those lower 3 vibratory states. And I'm just hanging that on someone else's system that everybody might